Right, me lovers, welcome back to the channel. Today isn't an easy topic, but it's an important one, the masculinity crisis and how not to be hopeless. Today I'm going to be sharing with you, right to the end of the video, 5 reasons modern culture disintegrates, destroys, undermines masculinity, and what you can do about it. This is both for women and men, for you to get a better understanding that I've practically applied in my own life and I know that works. I was a confused teenager growing up. Sometimes society didn't give me the guidelines or the virtue signals as to what is masculinity and how actually is extremely important in today's society. Now, what I've noticed is over the past sort of 100 years, we've been under quite a masculine-driven culture, and it's kind of seesawed and flip-switched into more of a left-wing feminist movement, which now creates a very dissolved masculinity and a confusion, because we don't know if masculinity has its place in the world anymore. And to be honest with you, a political debate is healthy to find a middle ground. But what I'm seeing in the trends, and I'm not really a statistics guy, but I saw something that's pretty shocking online by the CDC between 2020 and 2021, 80% of suicides were men. Now, I know the fundamental reason of this is because emotionality is really not something that's spoken or verbalized by men, and it's not really a social norm. Women do very well at externalizing, socially feeling belonging. And while there is still judgment in the feminine space and sphere, it just seems more socially acceptable to share shame. In the male world, it doesn't so much. And there's a paradoxical living that we live, is that women want their men to be more emotional in relationship, yet at the same time don't want them to crack down and boil down and cry and talk about all their problems, because they are likely, hopefully, someone to depend upon in a family setting or even in society at large. We depend upon our men to do the difficult shit. They tend to take up on the roles in military, do the tough work in the sewage departments, build buildings with harnesses, doing the scary shit that no one's prepared to do. And now with the movement that masculinity needs to be dissolved and thrown into the bucket, it makes men feel even more isolated, even more useless. And what does uselessness create? A hopelessness. And likely, in the worst case scenario, suicide. We didn't feel useful in society. We didn't feel like we fulfill a deeper meaning or purpose. And of course we are, not to self-victimize but and self-blame, but I think there's a level of shame that men do need to share and have a tribal support network. Only 25% of those in self-help or therapists are men, meaning that men don't have the support network to turn towards if they're at those rock bottoms. And interestingly, this impacts women and the family unit. There's another stat, I'm going to throw one right up to the camera now, that in Portugal alone, where I am right now, is one of the highest divorce rate countries. At 60% of married couples end up divorced. Now, I think globally it's around about half, but we've started to undermine the family unit, roles, trust, working together through the hard shit to ensure that the family unit stays strong, and that we've actually glorified singledom in much of our pop culture. And the primary reason why couples are divorcing and men aren't having that family support network or even trust or even feeling like family is something to aim towards, because it may end up in dissolution, rejection, abandonment, all those scary human biological things we want to run away from, which triggers trauma responses, which triggers deep, painful emotional experiences that we just don't want to face. And if we see the statistics that from the States, that, the median marriage only lasts 8 years, that the divorce rate is up to 60% in Portugal. Primary reason is the lack of commitment. 73% was the reason why. That could have led into cheating, infidelity, into the reason that we haven't funneled our focus into one person and haven't explored depth, and we're just piddle-paddling in the shallow. And you may be asking, Josh, why are you talking about divorce rates? The whole video is about masculinity, but the primary reason for a man to provide and feel meaningful and give back as a form of purpose is the family unit. So if the family unit does not exist, if committed relationships don't exist, then what is a man? But the great positivity in all of this, that while we may be isolating, while we may be moving out of the relationship, statistics show that the psychology of the individual decreases. There's singles, and especially men who self-isolate, end up having a poorer mental health, physical health, and potentially do not succeed in their career as much as then having a healthy partner in life creates. So today we're going to be exploring the epidemic of which is creating such a toxic that's spilling upon what it means to be a man. Now, let's first understand the 5 core reasons why masculinity is being diluted. The first one, and you may have guessed before we started, is the world of convenience. Yes, we live in a world where we can get anything at the snap of the fingers. As long as we let it supplement our lives to eradicate the things that we don't like to do anymore and increase our standard of living and our healthy state of being and create space for quality time with loved ones, it's okay. But if we allow it to substitute our humanness, then we're never going to grow as individuals. We're never actually going to have a personal development. And this then triggers our dopamine so much so that we become adrenally fatigued. While dopamine is a very helpful hormone to motivate us towards a bigger goal, if we override or flood those neurons, then they become noveltyless. And then we require bigger hits of dopamine. That then just eradicates passion, purpose. And a problem that's perpetuated this, especially with relationships, is dating apps. We can get any choice with the flip of the switch, especially if you're good looking and you've got lots of things going for you. You have the pick of the choice, right? And what does that create? Choice overwhelm. It overwhelms our normal binary decision making, and it gives us 20 options when normally in a small village we would have had 1 or 2. But what you can do is create a real strong sense of self, strong sense of boundaries, no matter what this external world is throwing at you. So this is what we're going to do in the solutions to this one core problem of overwhelm of choice and convenience. And the first one is devote yourself to a meaning larger than yourself. A good place to start is find your retribution in your own suffering. So go back in your own story, in your own hero's journey. What are those rock bottoms that you really care about? Where in the pain did you find that there was a mission worth fighting for? Was there anything you want to fight? Is there any antagonist in your journey, an enemy that you're willing to plug on your armor, recruit your anger, and fight against it? Is there anything that you want to do the difficult thing in order to achieve? And what solution are you devoted to finding because of that pain? An example purpose could be to leave the world with less suffering and stop humiliation in its tracks when I see it. And this is stopping bullies at school. I know my heart was so big when I was bullied myself. So then when I see an aggressor or a perpetrator upon a bully or victim, I'm angry. I'm standing up for the victim. And why? In this short little lifetime that we've got in this beautiful universe, we must create a convincing purpose and a meaning inside our pain and suffering to recruit that passion that maybe we've lost in our society, that may have alienated it and confused it and labeled it as toxic when it's been delivered by a man. Everything in our life that's worth fighting for is somewhat emotional. While emotions are fleeting, we still need to recruit emotions because they do dictate what decisions we make. So you need to have that real strong core, again, which is a masculine virtue, a real strong, secure, stable, protective core that knows when to activate. Secondly, I would suggest a zone of optimal choice. Now, I studied a retail degree, and while it numbed my brain, I took away one thing. And it was that retailers, if they gave consumers too much choice, consumers would just get overwhelmed and never really make their mind up. And they would either turn away from the shelves or not give as much business. And then when a retailer had too few options, there's not enough on the shelves for me to choose from, and that they could probably find better elsewhere. But then when retailers got into the idea of the zone of optimal choice, which was enough but not too much or not too little, then things became very frictionless for the consumer. So how can you do that in your own life? I would start with yes and no answers. Ask yourself those questions. Does this bring me closer to my goals? Yes, no. And again, try not to be biased in your questions. Ask yourself the difficult questions, such as, am I hiding something right now? Am I hiding any emotion, any sadness, any feeling? And then probe with a why following those answers as well. And the quicker we get at the better yes and no's, we then unravel the identity crisis that we're in, the identity confusion. Because an identity confusion, and when we're uncertain and fluid in our identity, we're then fluid in our relationships. And we're not really dependent upon. Our partner can then not relax and lean into your certainty. An example, I was a teenager with my family, and I remember a car coming up behind me on a country road, and I could not choose a side of the road to go safely on. And my dad was like, Josh, choose. And I couldn't choose left or right. Because I was a crippled boy, I was quite numbed away from my emotional and conscious being. And so I didn't really have any clarity in those kind of responses that need to be had. I also spent ages, when it came up to my late teens, choosing a chocolate bar. I didn't know what was the best for me. I'm a maximalist, so I always want the best experience. I want the best product. But that fear of missing out cripples me from just making a decision and making mistakes and learning from them. So be prepared and resilient to make the mistakes, learn from them, and grow from them as you make them. And when you start to realize and start trusting your yeses and nos and your decisions about where to go on a trip, what recipe to cook that night, which business to launch if you want to go that far. If the consequences are large, such as a big move or moving to a new apartment, of course, spend more time making a decision. But if it's as small as having a chocolate bar in your afternoon, it doesn't really matter so much. Spend more time on decisions that matter and less on those that are going to have littler consequences. And while Freudian psychology would suggest we have an id inside, that devil on the shoulder that does always need to be satisfied to some extent. So finding better outlets for your highs, potentially going to the movies or the cinema rather than going and dialing into porn. You know, I think self-pleasure is a very vital core part of self-love as well, but manage it, everything in line with balance. And a fun fact for you, a daily fap is not good for you. But if you leave it every 7 days or, few days, you're going to be at the peak of your testosterone limit and then you're going to surpass, you're going to let your life force recycle. And usually, pleasure seekers tend to be externalizers. We tend to run away from our emotional world. So the deeper you get at understanding your emotional world through journaling, through introspection, through your alone time, then the better you will get at creating a deep, meaningful purpose. I know women will show you a seductive lure. In history, Cleopatra did it to Julius Caesar. She built an empire by sexually seducing him to give him what he wanted, and got by his side and got them what she wanted. When you do come across women that want to zap you from your certainty, from your own purpose, from your own commitments, this is your time to now deliver your own boundaries, deliver on your word. And it's the practice of not succumbing to pleasure and short-term gratification, but having self-control. And while we live in a world of internet and no boundaries to work, sometimes we need to have boundaries upon our time. And that means putting your phone in airplane mode, being uncontactable. While I don't advocate for avoidance, I advocate for honesty and being true with your word and telling people where you are, when you are, and those you care about. But you must be hard to contact. You're not going to bend and bow down to everyone who asks for free advice. And when you have no time or space boundaries to the limitless digital world, then you're going to be constantly a victim to it. Now, don't do this in dating, be honest. Definitely do this in your business. Do this with everyone online. And with that protected time, do a creative thing. A great book I'd recommend is The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. He essentially says, we of course need to do what we need to do, but make a creative act sacred. That we're not earning money from it, essentially. But we protect and devote a sacred space and time to do something creative. Create the excuse that it's already been done, somebody else is doing it better. No, you have a beautiful juice, a beautiful passion, a beautiful gift that nobody else can deliver like you. If that was true, I wouldn't be making this video. So many topics on masculinity and self-help like this, but I'm going to do it in my own little flavour. Your little ripple effect of positive impact impacts your family if you have one, your loved one if you have one. Now, I've been in paralysis all the time when I've always wanted a certain number of likes or views. And every time I've jumped towards outcomes, I've overwhelmed myself from even starting because I get too caught up in numbers. And while the world of quick gratification will always drag our attention, our meaning, interestingly, if we don't set a meaning for ourselves, a tyrant will set one for us. And that's the system for us to live by, that we have no say or are living unconsciously. Same thing goes for relationships. You will fall for a narcissist if you're not sure on who you're looking for. And interestingly, while you want to create your own meaning so a tyrant doesn't create one for you, there's a pursuit in fighting tyrants and controllers and abusers that's really satisfying. Now, a story of mine, I was part of a gym, working in a gym, and it was controlled by a pretty tyrannical leader, toxic culture. Became very sly, destroyed my reputation as a personal trainer. There was also slander behind my back, and I heard through other personal trainers that the boss didn't think I was very skillful at my job, while customer feedback would say different. I was good in what I did, in my own personal style. But your authenticity will trigger tyrants, because you're a form of a revolutionary and a mirror to them that they haven't unlocked in themselves. But I can assure you now, there's so much purpose in fighting tyrants, putting up the fight. And that is a masculine virtue. And reason number 2 for masculinity being under threat is the destruction of the family unit, or unity at large. We're now being bifurcated and seen as enemies. The feminist movement especially wants to see men be as tiny as possible. We've lost sense of our own identity as traditional men. And pop culture want to suggest, and just like Selena Gomez's song that goes, "I'll be single soon," I'll leave it to her, but it's glorification of singledom. It's glorification of leaving that relationship. And I can see if it's a toxic relationship and a tyrant within, of course, get out of it. But when we glamorize singledom is when the issue happens. I totally agree that we need to offset loneliness with worthiness when we're single. And then when we've had negative experiences in relationships, we glamorize singledom. And this only creates hypervigilance to connection again. And this may come as a shock, but research even suggests that 54% of people who stay single for a long time have a negative consequence upon your health, upon your physical health, your mental health, and your just general well-being. On the whole, those that seek commitment and long-term satisfying relationships are actually healthier as a result. And to get even deeper there, being single for a prolonged amount of time leads to depression, suicidal thoughts, anxiety, and mood disorders. So love is a healer for us. And it implies that we're having a trade-off when we're single. It might not mean that your mind and body is being impacted right now, but there's kind of a trade-off. It's like, getting drunk the night before and then having the hangover. There's a hangover effect to your singleness. Now, as much as I don't want to agree with the fact that you're unchangeable because we're neuroplastic, we can definitely rewire our bodies and minds as we like it, with the energy that we give it. So everything is healable to an extent, but to the extent of which damage you're doing to yourself by denying relationship and denying togetherness is something to look at. And this destruction of unity has massive consequences on the quality of parenting. But if we destroy unity, if we destroy the family unit, what happens? Fathers become useless. Kids grow up with very, very bad nervous systems that can't nurture themselves, are fearing self-protection, so become hypervigilant because dad is not around. Or we have very feminized men, feminized dads that aren't there to protect, or not physically capable to, or creating a secure foundation to. And a great practice and solution for this is, how can you create more unity in your own social networks? How can you be now, as best as you possibly can, the very fabrics of what the father you aim to be for your kids to be? How can you embody all the traits that you wish dad was, or you think a father should be? What does that look like now? And reason number 3, how modern culture destroys masculinity and what you can do about it, is how education is pro-self-deprecation. Men are underperforming against women. There's more uneducated men than there is women. And it's all very academic and intellectual, whereas men tend to be more handy, more competitive, more playful, and potentially more creative, but it's not allowed to be manifested in the typical traditional school system. Now, interestingly, 2/3 of the best GPA are women, and 2/3 of the worst GPA are men. And women are much benefiting from the system. There are less men fulfilling the health, literacy, administration, and education systems. 24% of men fulfill these spaces, and it's just declining. And especially in the emotionally captivating industries such as psychiatrists or therapists. Interesting stat for you is that 39 to 29% are male, and under 30, only 5% are male. Those that are psychiatrists, those that are the people that men go to help for their emotional trouble. And so while the crisis is in the education system, and while the professionals themselves are not men, we at large are losing the masculine virtues. We're losing the examples of what men are. And interestingly, I saw in The Sun, it's a great source to follow, but men only emotionally mature in middle 30s. And men may not ever emotionally mature. But I know for a fact, though, the boy's brain develops slower than women. So I think it's about 1 to 2 years lagging difference between the prefrontal cortex and the emotional centers and the assessment centers that reintegrate. But my opinion on all of this is that we must self-educate. And this is where we feel empowered. Start to learn about things that really light up a fire in you. Go askew from the natural path of education and pick up books, pick up self-development, listen to podcasts, listen to videos like this. So pick your destiny, and that in and of itself is assertive. But with a new socialist movement curriculum that's creating an identity crisis in people's bodies, it doesn't seem great for a traditional masculine to thrive. So choose your path. Which leads me to the reason number 4 of why modern culture destroys masculinity, and that's malevolent standards. Now, some women are leading the movement that men aren't enough, men are lazy, men are bad in their core, all men are bad, and I just got to do his job. Well, that leaves no room for you to actually step up and build some trust, right? But this horrible narrative leaves no room for men to then prove and gain approval. But the danger of these malevolent standards, it creates an expectation gap. It creates such a projection that's impossible to shed. And this is called the Pygmalion effect. Now's the time to really set your own standards and believe in yourself. One of the hardest things we can possibly do is breaking out of an identity. So you only know who you are by experimenting. And interestingly, a fun fact for you is that the use of contraceptive pills has made women more estrogenic. And in a book about parenting, I read that actually the London Thames or the river has more estrogen in it than ever before, and makes fish in that river and makes male fish breed eggs within, change its sexual core. So aim to be above average, steady Brad, rather than hunky Chad. It's not all about what we've been fed to believe by women to be. It's really just growing at our own rate. As long as we're challenging ourselves, it should be enough. So do just enough, like we say in exposure therapy. Do enough to bring yourself out of it into that zone of optimal discomfort. So much so that challenges you, but doesn't overwhelm you. That helps you grow a skill, gets you out into your greatest fears. You're trying to confront your fears in your hero's journey at the same time as build self-trust to then go out back at it again and have a worthy dragon to fight. And again, who's that enemy? Get clear on it. And with that progressiveness, that progressive building of trust, you create your own standard, which goes against the malevolent standards, which are creating an identity impossible to fulfill. And the 5th and final reason why modern culture destroys masculinity is the high functioning to failure. Now, we are surrounded by those that glorify Forbes 30 under 30, glorify working every waking hour of the day, building that multi-million-dollar business by 80. This only just creates comparisonitis, looking over the fence into somebody else's garden and then denigrating from your own beautiful garden growing right in front of you. The best thing I possibly did was a digital detox. Stop following those influences that trigger you. Just cut, avoid, unfollow, detox your digital space. So delegating energy drainers, energy leakers, and getting somebody else or building a team or becoming a leader to a team that can then do those for you. Start to know your zone of genius, becoming an expert. And we need to be very careful of this because in those unconscious roles, we then accept unconscious environments, which then turns your purity into piss. And when you're busy trying to keep up with this high functioning environment, remember, your gift is not another's. And from all the many documentaries and all my studying into human design, is that some things are unquantifiable. The spiritual realm is unquantifiable at the core. Love, relational, connectivity is unquantifiable. Yet we're never measuring that as a zone or of importance or success to who we are. And as I said before, deconsume, detox. Find your style. Now, when I was a young lad at school, there was always trendiness. There was trendy haircuts, man. And at some point, there was this mullet with spikiness, spiky haircuts, a front fringe like this. I won't recreate it because it was tragic. But I copied the cool lads at school. It was copycat culture. And no wonder then I became a people pleaser and a copier to my surroundings and forgot who I was. I lost who the fuck I am. In my own solitude, by deconsuming, by choosing my own style and rolling with it, by actually tuning into what I actually liked, in such as music, start there. Music is a great taste and a great vehicle for your fashion. But you'll find your style in your solitude and your quietness. So never neglect that. Look people in the eyes. Look someone right in the eyes, because that does create this connection. It creates this soothing effect on both of your nervous systems. Also, find the need to be needed. Do the best at your job. And me as a cashier at TK Maxx back in the day when I was about 18, big up TK Maxx, man, that was a golden job. I had to hide me bloody minging feet, that's for sure. They put me in the back office in the stock room because I wasn't upgraded to that sandal space. I digress, but it's all about giving your all to your job. I always believe that masculinity is giving your all potently to everything you do. Next, I would say live resiliently and live without regret. Now, I've launched many failures in my life, and again, it does make me feel a bit more risk averse as time goes on. But interestingly, it's letting me learn more about my path. Interestingly, the more failures you accrue, the bigger the chunks you're chiseling at your little statue you're becoming. And what's really healing is something I was experimenting with previously. It's called the Garbage Post Challenge. Now, this helps creators, but it's about publishing shit without thought. It doesn't have to be perfect. And it's healing for perfectionists. It's healing for golden boys. It's healing for those that felt like they needed to please everybody in order to then value and get love. And don't get me wrong, peers, bosses, family, mates are always giving you feedback to what you're creating. And sometimes it can really hurt when there's rejection. And as long as you're doing your version of your hero's journey, that's all you can do. Only take feedback from those that are in the places that are 5 steps ahead or in places where you aim to be, because they have authority to tell you, and also the fundamental truth that there is schadenfreude out there, which is just to say people find satisfaction in others' misfortunes. Just know that there is a portion, so said to be 3% of the population, that are sadists, psychopaths, narcissists, that are Machiavellian, are trying to make you feel small enough so that they can get something from you or feel good about themselves. And we are humans, man. We have a little dark nature in there, and it's something that we can't be naive to. So you define your success, and don't let a high-functioning environment make you burn out and make you feel less of a man because you're not achieving, so say, XYZ. And I want to leave you with this. My dad left me this beautiful saying, is that when I broke up with somebody I was dating before Jazz 5 years ago, I found out the truth of their character, and it wasn't great. I won't get too far into it, going through the final conversation we ever had. My dad went, Josh, put walls around your heart. And it was a great way to just boundary up your beautiful empathy, your beautiful sensitivity as a man. And it does need temporary walls. It's not to mean to say build forts that are there forever and to stop everyone being let in and giving anything out. It's the picket fence analogy, which I really like. But I like to call it a castle with a drawbridge. Letting down the drawbridge only to those that have shown you trust. And with that letting in the drawbridge, you have the moat, and you have the many rooms that lead up to your king's bedroom. There's the armory. There's the lounge. There's the many rooms that they have to progress through until they get to you right at the top, which they get the crown's jewels, your heart. And I digress again, but take your time and have tests in your relationships, because they're extremely important to protect your masculinity in your king's chamber. Ultimately, for all 5 reasons. 1, the world of convenience. 2, destruction of unity. 3, education for self-deprecation. 4, malevolent standards. And 5, high functioning to failure. We must create our very own security and not depend upon it outside of ourselves. Because the world around us does want to manipulate us to be something different. You must never abandon yourself for the sake of pleasing somebody else who doesn't have the best intent in mind for you. Do the difficult thing and you are designed to bounce back. It's in your biology to bounce back. And nobody's coming to save you, like the Princess movie. We're not the princess here, we are the prince. But always ask for help if you need it. It's always there. And that's going to be a great segue into the one-to-one coaching. I do offer those at a high level. Men that really do want that extra support, emotionally, physically, relationally, whatever you feel. There's a one-to-one form down below or a webpage you can visit. Thank you very much for spending your time all the way through now. And I wish there was some wisdom that you can take away. And if I've done any of those things for you today, then do share this with a mate. Subscribe, like, and again, comment below if you've resonated with any of these stories, any of these points. And again, is there any other reason you would add to contribute to why masculinity is dissolving so badly? I'd love to hear it, and I will see you on the next one. Plenty more to come.